This is Linda Snetselaar, and I am Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, also an Associate Provost of Outreach and Engagement, and a professor in the Department of Epidemiology and the College of Public Health here at the University of Iowa. And I'm extremely honored today to have, as a part of our podcast, Dr. Cindy Leung. She is an assistant professor of nutritional sciences at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and she is also a part of our board of editors for the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and has written articles for our upcoming issue on food insecurity. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you for having me.
I thought that I would jump right in with a question that I think maybe is paramount as we discuss issues like this. What is your definition of food insecurity?
Whenever people ask me, how do I define food insecurity, I always find myself going back to the USDA Department of Food Insecurity. And it's a mouthful, but just so we're all on the same page, food insecurity is the limited or uncertain availability of nutritionally adequate and safe foods, or the limited or uncertain ability to acquire acceptable foods in socially acceptable ways. And the longer that I've been researching food insecurity, the more I tend to appreciate how thoughtful and thorough this definition is. So it has the idea that food insecurity includes adequate food access and food availability. It has the idea that foods need to be nutrient-rich and safe from toxicants. It has the idea that food should be acquired with dignity, and so we shouldn't resort to dumpster diving or stealing or even standing in line at a food pantry to get food to meet our basic needs. And so food insecurity is definitely more than just skipping a meal because you want to save money, or eating ramen because you couldn't afford a healthier meal. It has all these different components that include the environmental piece, the psychological piece, and then, of course, the nutrition piece.
So important. Great concepts. I know here at the University of Iowa, we have talked about the idea of actually having a food pantry for students. And so your comment on ramen noodles is something that is often discussed here with our University of Iowa students.
Mm-hmm. Something is happening here at the University of Michigan. We are also in the works of developing our on-site permanent food pantry and changing the stigma that college students shouldn't be eating ramen noodles or boxed mac and cheese to get by every night, that they deserve better food. And so I hope it's a conversation that all colleges can have, because we're seeing very high levels of food insecurity among college students.
Yes, so important. We often read about, and many are involved in doing research in this area, and I wondered if you might talk a bit about those populations that are most often impacted as we look at food insecurity.
The nice part is that we monitor food insecurity in the country very closely, and around October or November, the USDA releases its report of which populations are most currently impacted by food insecurity, as well as what's the national prevalence of food insecurity. So we just have the latest statistics from 2017, and in that report, we found that the national prevalence of food insecurity is 11.8%, which is a slight decrease from last year. But the report also highlights populations that might be at higher risk, that has prevalences of food insecurity are higher than the national average. And so that includes households with children, particularly children living in a household with a single parent, also single adults who live alone, households where the adults are Black or Hispanic. And so some of these demographics haven't really changed in previous years. They're the groups that tend to face higher levels of food insecurity time after time. And then what's not in this report, and what we we're just talking about are this extremely high level of food insecurity that we're seeing in college students. So there's been two reports that I tend to cite often in my work. One that's out of the Wisconsin Hope Lab, which was a study of many different 2-year and 4-year colleges, and they found levels of food insecurity around 30 to 40%. And of course, there's demographic variations in those colleges as well, but across most colleges, that level is significantly higher than what we're seeing in the national population. And then there was also a systematic review done by Dr. Meg Bruning, also published in JAND a couple years ago, that found that the prevalence of food insecurity on college campuses was between 35 to 42%. So again, almost 3 times higher than the national average. And I think a lot of us who study food insecurity are starting to realize that this is happening under our own eyes, on our own institutions, and we have to be figuring out what's the causes as well as what are the solutions.
Yes, I totally agree. It's such an important issue, and I know one that is receiving a lot of discussion here on our campus at the University of Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, what do you think are some of the most concerning issues related to food insecurity?
Well, I think there's a lot of health issues related to food insecurity, and there's been a lot of epidemiologic research around these in the past several decades. And so food insecurity, I think sometimes people conceive of it as just a dietary issue, but we're seeing that it's so much more than that. You know, for children, it's a developmental issue. It has been associated with nutrient inadequacies, poor physical activity, poor psychological or psychosocial development, behavior problems, lower academic achievement. For adults, we've seen associations with higher levels of chronic disease like hypertension, obesity, diabetes. And then for people who have those diseases, food insecurity is associated with poor disease management. So it really spans the whole lifespan in terms of milestones or behaviors or health outcomes, as well as being able to manage conditions as they arise. And then more recently, in terms of the studies on college campuses, we've seen that food insecurity is associated with lower academic achievement, and this has been seen in studies at various college campuses. And part of my work has been trying to understand how these associations are arising. So is it because students just don't have enough money and they can't afford healthy food, and so they're just feeling hungry all the time in class? Or is there something else about food insecurity that is causing these poor health outcomes? And part of my research is I'm trying to understand this role of psychological stress, that food insecurity is a chronic stressor, and that if you're food insecure, you're constantly thinking about where your next meal is coming from, how you're going to, for a college student, how you're going to navigate your campus to make sure that you can get to the event that might have free food, or you can get to the place that has the cheapest groceries, in addition to studying and trying to maintain a normal college social life and all these other factors. And so in one of our forthcoming papers, led by Anthony Mesa, we found that students talked about the physical aspect of food insecurity, where they would skip class because they didn't want to, they didn't want their stomach growling, and they didn't want other people to hear them. They'd be embarrassed about that, or they would just try to sleep off the hunger, and then they wouldn't have enough time to study. And then there was the mental piece where they talked about students constantly thinking about where their next meal is going to come from, and if their thoughts are being occupied by food and food access, and they don't have enough time to think about what the instructor is talking about in class, or trying to fill their head with the knowledge from their classes. And so there was this physical and mental piece and how food insecurity was affecting their academic performance. And so I think we need to study a lot more about how food insecurity impacts health outcomes and also academic achievement and long-term economic potential in college students. But just in the general population, we need also a lot more long-term studies of how food insecurity is impacting health throughout the life course.
Yes, so very important. I know that some of the research that we're doing here on our campus that involves students is focused on mental health, and I think some of the things that you've touched on would indicate that maybe there's something we haven't looked at closely enough in terms of a contributor to mental health, and that might actually be food insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
So very importantly, as we look at changes today, and particularly probably policy changes, what are your thoughts on policy changes that might reduce food insecurity?
Well, certainly the thing that comes to mind immediately is the Farm Bill, which provides funding for all of our federal nutrition programs. And the Farm Bill has been in the news a lot lately, and for those of us who advocate for anti-hunger policies and public health policies, we were happy to see that the Farm Bill more or less keeps SNAP and other food assistance programs at the current levels. And so there were a lot of talks around stricter work requirements for SNAP, shortening the process of which you have to recertify, just making it harder for people to access SNAP and to stay on SNAP if they were eligible. And so the fact that in the current Farm Bill, which keeps SNAP at the funding levels and removes all these stricter eligibility and work requirements, that's a great sign that we're going to keep our federal food programs at the levels that they were in the last Farm Bill, and hopefully we'll have room to expand upon these in the future. So SNAP, WIC, our school lunch programs, these are definitely our primary safety net in terms of programs that are ensuring adequate food to families who might not be able to purchase food with their own resources. And I think it's incredibly important that we use our research to show that these programs are vital to our economy and also to the health of vulnerable populations. But in addition to that, I think that there are also other programs, federal programs, that could help with food insecurity. And food insecurity is just as much an income issue as it is a food issue. And so programs that keep or raise the minimum wage, that provide employment opportunities, these are all great for working families to ensure that working families can make a decent wage, can provide health insurance to their children. And these, even though they're not directly focusing on food insecurity, do have indirect impacts on making sure that families have adequate resources to purchase food.
Yes, policy changes when we talk about food insecurity are so incredibly important, and thank you so much for focusing a bit on the Farm Bill and how it matters incredibly as we talk about the concept of food insecurity. Mm-hmm. I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning, and I appreciate your thoughts on this very important issue. I know that the next time that hopefully our entire membership reads about food insecurity will be in our special issue, which you have contributed to. Would there be anything you might like to point out in terms of our upcoming food insecurity issue?
I think it's great that Jan has devoted a whole issue to food insecurity. Food insecurity is not really a new concept, but it's one that's persisted for decades, as long as we've been measuring it in the U.S. And the space of food insecurity has continued to change in recent years. And so we've tried to address that with our research. And so I just really appreciate Jan for highlighting this important issue and also giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts this morning. And I just hope that we continue to have this conversation in the future.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your very thoughtful ideas related to food insecurity. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. It was a pleasure to speak with you.